Hello, my colleagues and I are part of the chronic fatigue service here at Salford Royal. We all have experience in treating patients with chronic fatigue. We would like to share our knowledge on how to advise patients on how to manage their fatigue. First of all, good pacing is a vital component in treating fatigue. Pacing is all about knowing your limits, but this can be very hard when you have been unwell. Some patients may be expecting themselves to perform at the same level as before they were ill, and therefore overdo activities, which may be counterproductive in the long term. On the other hand, other patients may be resting excessively because they understandably assume that rest will cure fatigue. This can also be making it difficult to recover. As you can see, pacing requires a delicate balance which can be tricky to obtain. We are now going to explain how to achieve this. The basic idea of pacing is to avoid both prolonged activity and prolonged rest. Instead, we are aiming for gentle activity interspersed with plenty of breaks. For someone whose fatigue is severe, these breaks may be quite long, and for someone whose fatigue is on the mild end of the spectrum, shorter breaks will do. Be guided by what the patient tells you about their fatigue. Advise patients to spread activities out evenly throughout the day, avoiding any boom and bust in activity. Patients are often tempted to squeeze in all their chores and commitments whilst they have a good day, but this leads to overdoing things, what we call a boom in activity, and which is very unhelpful. Overdoing activities usually leads to a crash where there will be excessive resting, something which can exacerbate the fatigue. In order to avoid the boom and bust, patients should aim to do a similar amount each day and make sure that activities are kept to a manageable level. This means aiming for their baseline. So what is a baseline? This is the halfway point between the activity that can be achieved on a good day and the activity that can be achieved on a bad day. So for example, if a patient can go for a 20-minute walk on a good day and 0 minutes on a bad day, the midpoint between these two is 10 minutes. This is the baseline. So we will now advise the patient to have a 10-minute walk every day, whether it is a good day or a bad day. This means that on good days, the patient will have to stop while they still have lots of energy left, and on bad days, they will have to push themselves slightly. Patients often find it hard to stop themselves when they have a lot of energy, but it's important not to exceed the baseline. Using an activity diary where the patient notes down which activity they did and how long for may be helpful. Telling patients to see how they feel and do what they feel able to is unhelpful, as it is likely to lead to symptom-contingent behaviour. This encourages boom and bust with inactivity on bad days and overactivity on good days. Instead, advice should emphasise similar levels of activity every day.
It can be hard to find the correct baseline to begin with, and a certain amount of trial and error should be expected. The person will know that they have found an appropriate level of activity when they are able to undertake activities without experiencing crashes afterwards. A crash is where a person has to have extended rest because of exhaustion, and they may feel unwell and experience an increase in their symptoms of fatigue. If a patient is able to follow their baseline activity for a week or two without crashes, they can increase their activity. For example, when the person that we mentioned in the previous example has been able to do their 10-minute walk for a whole week, he could then increase his walks to 15 minutes a day. Any increase in activity should be done in very small steps to avoid the risk of overdoing things. Please advise patients that reducing fatigue can be a lengthy process, but that it is important not to rush things, in addition to alternating between activities and rest. It can also be helpful to alternate between cognitive and physical activities. Fatigue consists of both physical fatigue, that is to say feeling tired after walking, doing household chores, and cognitive fatigue, that is say mental exhaustion, poor concentration and memory. Cognitive fatigue can occur after activities such as writing emails, having conversations, and being in environments with a lot of sensory stimuli, such as bright lights and noise. Whilst cognitive activities can cause fatigue, it is important to say that they should not be avoided. However, it is important that the patient limits the time spent on these activities and has regular breaks. These activities should be paced in the same way that physical activities are paced. Please bear in mind that many cognitive activities can be quite enjoyable, such as spending time with friends, and patients can find it hard to take breaks. Now, if we think of pacing physical activities and cognitive activities, the patient may do a physical activity, such as walking, to post a letter, and then a cognitive activity, such as reading a book, and then have to have a break.
Another factor which is important to address is sleep. Patients often sleep for lengthy periods of time because they are so exhausted. However, oversleeping is likely to exacerbate the symptoms of fatigue. A patient who sleeps significantly more than 8 hours per day and is also fatigued is likely to benefit from reducing their sleep, not increasing it. Oversleeping and daytime napping is also likely to cause disruptions to nighttime sleep, which will then cause further fatigue. This can therefore easily result in a vicious circle, further exacerbating the problem. Reducing naps can be very difficult if there are significant sleeping problems, and it is therefore usually best to gradually reduce naps by half an hour each week, with the aim of not having any naps at all. There also needs to be a good routine around sleep, with set times for waking up and going to bed each day. Now that we have established a good pacing and sleep routine, we need to consider other factors which are linked with fatigue. Mood can have an effect on fatigue, and people with depression may lack motivation to engage in good self-care. In order to achieve good emotional well-being, we need to have an ACE day. And ACE stands for achievement, connection with others, and enjoyment. We all need to have these components in our life every day for well-being. And it's particularly important for people who suffer from fatigue. Achievement means perhaps doing a chore or task every day. It doesn't have to be anything very advanced. Whilst chores are usually the less enjoyable part of the day, they also make us feel useful and give us a sense of satisfaction that we have completed them. If we have weeks or months without a sense of achievement, we are likely to feel low in mood. Connecting with others is clearly difficult during this pandemic, so patients will have to be creative here. It's easy to neglect this now that socializing is discouraged, but it is important that patients interact with others regularly in a safe way, such as via the phone or video calls. Most of us are social beings, and our mood is likely to suffer if we go for an extended period of time without speaking to others. People who suffer from fatigue are likely to be struggling and are particularly vulnerable. The last letter of the acronym is E, which stands for enjoyment. Patients with fatigue often report that they spend what little energy they have on work or looking after their family, and that they simply don't have any time left to spend on hobbies, friends, or other enjoyable activities. They also often report feeling guilty for taking time to enjoy themselves when they have spent time resting. This is an unhelpful belief which can maintain the boom and bust cycle. Enjoyment is an essential part of rehabilitation, and we should give the patient the message that fun equals energy. Therefore, patients should make sure that they have some enjoyable activity every day. That could be a hobby such as crochet or gardening, or maybe a coffee with a friend.
The road to recovery can be long, and there is likely to be setbacks along the way. Please advise patients that relapses in fatigue are to be expected from time to time and are not an indication of failure. It is important not to engage in self-criticism or self-blame when a setback happens, as this can easily make the setback or crash worse by bringing on low mood. Instead, a setback should be viewed as a learning opportunity where we reflect on what happened in the days leading up to the setback. If we notice that we perhaps overdid things or we haven't had enough breaks, we can then learn from this and adjust the activity level accordingly. If a patient suffers from a mental health issue, such as depression, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress, please consider referring them to their local IAP service. Treating the mental health issue is likely to help the patient also reduce their fatigue. If you notice that your patient is still struggling after giving them the self-help advice in this video, please consider referring them to your local chronic fatigue service where they can be assessed by an MDT and receive specialist fatigue management. Thank you for listening.